Suzie, what do you think about scale? You've done a really great job in New York,
You
so
know what? It wasn't me. The network existed and the model,
you're
and
managing it though.
I'm
You're doing
managing it.
it. You're
It's grown. We
all right.
survived COVID. Yeah. So I work for Repair Cafe Hudson Valley. Officially, I work for the nonprofit that pays me to do that, which is Sustainable Hudson Valley. And we just had to talk about fiscal sponsorship, which is what we offer to our cafes. And it just this group that came and all sort of networked behind the scenes, 68 cafes up and down the Hudson Valley, all working together, but independent. And so that's one model for how to scale this. But we were just discussing with Leanna Frick from the Station North Tool Library. We don't pay our fixers. Everyone but me in the entire 68 cafes is a volunteer, with the very few exceptions of like one or two library organizers or government employee organizers. So that's one form of scaling, but that's not the ideal because we're all taking all this work on and no one's getting paid. So
Sure.
I would argue that that is not the ideal version, but I don't know what else to do.
I, I don't think we can land on ideal. That's the question. I would just present a different model that I've encountered here. So I'm Amanda Miller. I'm with the South King Tool Libraries. We're in South King County, Washington. And we've done repair events for before we were a tool library even. But what that meant is that we ended up partnering with the county. The county actually began programs through their solid waste division and a program called the Eco Consumer Program. And I see Amanda on here. Hey, Godwin. You know, those are institutions that are running some of those events. There's also been a lot of universities and things that are active in that. And I think that that is a precedent of scale that is interesting. I've the model is still based on the John Wackman, Elizabeth Knight model with, Repair Cafe sort of integration. There's also been things, Zero Waste Washington launched Fix It Fairs. If you all are here, you probably do know Cammy's Reuse Repair website, which is extensive in listing a lot of different events. But I think it's fascinating because during the pandemic, we had the opportunity to meet John Wackman, actually, Peter Mui, and we were doing drive-through repair events because times were odd. And so one of my constituents, we were working with our city institution to do that. I would pose the question of like, it doesn't work for everybody to work with their governments. So that's, if you're looking at scale in the proportion of do you scale it up to larger events or do you scale versus replicability? That might be one way to approach it, or scaling to the point of, paying folks for their time. Calls again some of the conversation yesterday about value systems, but we have questions. Hands are raised. I see Rosemary, so if you want to unmute there.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, and I run an organization called the Share Reuse Repair Initiative. But I used to be a community planner. And so just a little bit of a story here. When our kind of repair cafe movement really started to take off in the Lower Mainland, it was all great grassroots and volunteer organizations. And what we found is as soon as a really key volunteer or two would leave, uh-oh, like we were not doing well. And so we actually approached the city of Vancouver and said, look, your goals are those that want to see zero waste and waste prevention. And you're continually asking these repair groups to come in and do everything for free.
Mm.
Let's try another model. And so what we did is we did this kind of prototype process where the city of Vancouver designated one person and we figured out a model where they partnered with three external organizations. We figured out who did what. To make a long story short, those repair cafes were so popular that we actually had to chill out on the marketing because nobody likes to stand in line at a community center and not have their thing repaired. So we went to a registration model, blah, blah, blah. But what we found is that when we had some groups that were willing to do it for free and some that were trying to become a social enterprise, we find that all of the municipalities were trying to go for the free ones. And so we all got together and said, what is the best model to scale? We got a little bit, unfortunately, COVID was a bit of a challenge. But to make a long story short, we worked with the municipalities to agree that you have to pay people to do repair cafes. So our regional government now has funds. We have different models that have varying levels of involvement, all the way from just contract the repair organization to there may be a staff person. But we really felt the consistency, like if you have repair cafes run 10 times a year, people hang on to their things and they keep coming back. So that's the direction we ended up going. We were like really strong advocates that the repair organizations, the repair cafe organizations are not all 100% volunteer, because ultimately it's not, we live in an extraordinarily expensive part of the world. So that's what we ended up doing. It's an evolving process. And now we are looking at the different models and actually taking it to a share, reuse, repair guide for Canadian municipalities, to have those municipalities understand that there are different roles that they can play in repair cafes and other share and reuse options. But when I think about scale, like we've got lending libraries, we're now trying to get lending libraries into multifamily developments. And then I would like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a former planner, right? So I'm going to geek out a bit here. If we have car shares that are part of negotiating the height of a high rise, why not have lending libraries? And then we're kind of getting it into what is mainstream, not to dismiss, lending libraries that aren't part of this model, but I'm always thinking about how do we make this mainstream, consistent, and I'm a little bit of very strong advocate for the fact that we shouldn't be continuing to ask people to do everything for free, because everybody who's running repair cafes you are actually helping municipalities advance their goals. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, and
that's my shtick.
I just
I
want to
was just
ask,
gonna say, oh,
so with lending libraries, are you talking about libraries of things or both?
Yeah, so we have so initially we had lending libraries that were in shipping containers, and the city of Vancouver actually gave street space for them. But then it had to be a separate thing. It had to be a cooperative, and the model. I also teach business, by the way. The model just wasn't financially sustainable. So the next phase, and this is Chris Duckblock with the Thingery, maybe he's here. Now he's looking at how can he work with developers in multifamily developments, because we are rapidly going multifamily. Nobody can afford to live in a single family home in this region. How can we
and
have that integrated into high-rise developments?
I was gonna say that I feel like there's also just a conversation about what's the point of a repair cafe? Are you habit shift? Are you materials reclamation? Are you repairability, scale, spectrum? Are you, trying to just meet as many people and do things as possible? Because I hear really similar things with like, yeah, all of the above and below, right? And
Yeah.
I think we could 1,000 different ways about how to approach some of the questions. But the point of like, I really don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this. It's just got to be, sort of customized. And that's where I balk sometimes at the question of scalability, because if you're trying to scale in the same way in Canada as you would be domestically, it might come up with some other things or different perspectives. Jean, I have you, and then Tara, you're right next.
So good segue in. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Um, One of the things you mentioned in your earlier comments, Amanda, was replicability. And
Mhm.
that's how we kind of think about it. As opposed to scaling a lot of these solutions, they really need replication and then customization to the local communities. So basically provide, whether it's flexible platforms, flexible ideas, best practices, but those best practices are not going to work everywhere. So in Vancouver, in cities, say across Canada, there are going to be more resources available. I know in Seattle, we were also able to get grants with the West Seattle Tool Library, but in other areas, those resources coming from the municipalities just don't exist. under-resourced. The public libraries are often under-resourced, and they can be a good partner. So finding those community partners and trying to replicate the programs that work in similar areas with the similar tools, with similar backgrounds. I think that's really the way. And the Alliance putting together a lot of these different best practices. I think a lot of those tools are going to need to be sort of customized to you're in a urban area that does have city funding and or municipal funding that will potentially help. Here is example policy to help you get this funding passed, get it to your city council. But other areas just, I live in kind of rural New Hampshire right now, and our city taxes are going to be going up 10% property taxes, 10% per year over the next 3 years. No one has the appetite for additional new services because our taxes are already going up, and there's going to be just such a different mix. So having those different solutions for different areas, as you were saying, is absolutely key. So I'll kind of pause there and give other folks a chance to talk.
And some of those things, waivers, forms, certain standardized things, if you are building in for the highest level of whatever, EPA level verifications, then you can definitely do a lot of other levels. I'd love to hear from Tara, though. She's had all sides of this conversation, but thank you, Jean. That's always helpful too. Thank you. And Suzie, if you have thoughts, I'm just trying to watch the chat and make sure hands.
I'm having cat problems right now, so.
I don't have any solutions. I just wanted to I'm just gonna take us back a tiny bit, or zoom out a tiny bit. And I want to say two things. One, I want to always advocate for volunteers. Not being paid is not inherently a bad thing. So people have, in my experience, fixers have a lot of various reasons of why they show up and why they do this work. And at least in my experience, because we never paid anybody to do the work, that I almost think it would be insulting almost to say oh, we're gonna, I could see a stipend for gas or something like that.
There's a huge dynamic when you add money to it, though. That is definitely a factor.
Having said that, again, I'm totally biased. This is my own experience. I do think that a lot of things change when you are paying one or multiple people to be looking out for the planning of a tool library, a repair event, whatever the different thing is. So those are two things I wanted to say. And then I probably lost the last one, but I'll come back if I remember it.
I would just like to make a pitch. I see Eleanor Peck is on. She's going to do a talk later today about climate smart communities, which is a program that New York State has. I believe Maryland, Connecticut, and New Jersey also have a similar program. And there is a sort of a group of sustainable states that are doing climate smart states. And it's not, I don't 100% understand, because it's not that they clearly pay you for a repair cafe. But if your town goes through the process of becoming a climate smart community and then rises in the metrics of continuing to do the work, from bronze to silver to gold, your town gets quite a bit of money. And so my individual town just became silver and got a $600,000 grant. And so as the organizer of my local cafe, I reached out to the person in charge and I said, do you think you could cut us a check for some pizza next time? So at least it's a way, it is a support. There are those kinds of things going on. And really, it's a multi-step process of you have to go through the law to change the law to get something like that. But it's the first step. Canada's kicking our butt. That sounds amazing, but it's a first step.
There was a question about engaging with for-profit businesses, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, Suzie. I have worked with for-profit repair-centered businesses, and that, again, interjecting economic, we'll call it economic capital, right? Back to my conversation yesterday. If you were there for that, it was anyway. They have some sort of inherent marketing to promote that. They also have an inherent drive to support the habits of repair, and we know that that's a struggle for our culture. And then there's also a level of they like, sometimes if it's their job, if it's their business model, they would like to do that. But again, leveraging some of those relationships, I'm always the person that talks about like grants and contracts with governments and institutions, because that's how you could do that, having them at a discounted rate or incentivizing them with those government contracts to exist. That's not a new idea for businesses to be incentivized by government, or to take those that different angle. But if anyone else has any experience with that, I see Tara. Did you remember your third thing? Okay, you're muted, hun. Unmute, Tara.
I had myself unmuted and then I muted. Of course I did. Okay, I'll try to make it as quick as possible. What I was going to say is I think scalability, because I think I might have like planted this seed or probably amongst others in Cammie's head for the summit specifically. And my question is kind of, and I think Peter is kind of the person who put me onto this, is like, what's the proportion of stuff that we're fixing at an event, or say the 3,000 events across the globe? What's the proportion of stuff that we're fixing and keeping in good working order versus what is being put out on the market every day, right? And I think that those numbers are like really tough. And so that's just kind of like, from my point of view, that's the like really, really big question here that obviously we're not going to solve in this session, but I think that's kind of what we're opening up this conversation. And then I also wanted to say, if you haven't heard of the monthly repair managers call, please try to get yourself in on that. It's third Thursdays. It's 5 o'clock our time. So I think it's like 9 o'clock.
8 in the East, right? Yeah.
Okay, 8 o'clock for like New York. So, and those are really great. The monthly repair managers calls, I find, are really interesting places where we can have more of these conversations. So I'm just putting a plug in for that, and I'm done.
And Peter, I won't put him on the spot, but he's welcome to join the conversation. Did share the Global Fixers. There's a great Discord channel that goes in and talks about that. And since you're here, Peter, this is always our dynamic. We're not frenemies, we are friends, whether you like it or not. No, but I like to bring into the conversation equity. And we were talking again back to yesterday, the sort of wrap up conversation about time capital, and the access that programs like, repair events can provide for folks, while they may not have the visual acuity, physical acuity, time capital, or the capacity, propensity to do these things. It's the same idea of why, besides that we don't need to own everything, but in a tool library, an accountant might not have a hammer drill or something like this. But there's that to be said as well. And, you can fold that back into the conversation about time capital for fixers and repairers and why it might be a good angle to incentivize that. But again, thinking about these multiple forms of capital, another conversation that usually comes up, and I think is in the chat too, is about education and experience and teaching folks. That is always a goal as people are, workforce development. There you go, Rosemary. Yeah, on the same page. So, there's so many different ways to approach these questions when it comes to the individual communities. I think just the more that we share, the more that we can overlap. But also, I think what we don't talk about is failure and practicing in failure and what that looks like, because that is definitely something that has to happen too. You have to have a unhappy person at a repair cafe, or you don't get the badge of repair. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to get there, right? You got to be prepared for all of those things, or just the completely, I have a pile of sewing machines right now. But does anyone want to unmute?
Peter Mui said he was in 2 breakouts at once, so he couldn't respond, but which is very Peter. I will say that we, again, we don't pay anyone, but we always encourage / allow, actually allow / encourage people who do repair or any work for pay to advertise that they do this, and especially when at the cafe, and to consider it a place to get customers, that we have a clock repairer who comes, and he's a horologist. He does clock repair, but there's only so much you can do. I always call the repair cafes the emergency room. And so sometimes what you do is you figure out that you need to make an appointment at the OR, not, and so you go to the clock person and you pay him. And, and we have a lot of people who will take stuff home. I encourage them not to. And I had to tell someone today that, no, I do not do this at my house for free. Like, I do this every weekend, and no, you can't come to it's not even someone I know. And I'm like, come on, so
it happens all the time at the tool library. They're just like, you want this broken thing. And I'm like, nope, still no.
So boundaries are an important part of the volunteer space. But I think we are always, I think people who have come, they have gotten a lot back in other ways. But so I appreciate Tara saying that, because I always feel a little guilty that nobody gets paid. But that's what we're doing now. That's what we can do. And it's spreading and it's helping. And some cafes, the towns will give them money. The CSC program is not the only way towns sometimes pay for things. But they're not paying the people. That's as in film, the biggest cost would be staff. And that we have not figured that out yet.
Yeah, I see Jonathan has his hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, I've really enjoyed this. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hmm?
Okay, I've really enjoyed this conversation so far, and I've been really struggling with this question about the relationship between the volunteer efforts and the market, the repair market. And I think I don't remember who mentioned it, but basically the things that are repaired in volunteer efforts are given, like, accounting for the total mass of stuff, zero. It's zero. It has no impact on the global industrial metabolism. And so when we think about scaling from a materials and environmental impact perspective, not to say like the wonderful social pieces and the solidarity pieces and the community resilience pieces, those are all noticeable and measurable. But from a waste perspective and from a material extraction perspective, they haven't had any impact. And so scaling, as long as the rest of consumption is driven by capitalism and sort of a market economy, I need to somehow engage with that as the exit from volunteer repair. And I haven't totally figured out how to think about that yet, particularly because right now the market doesn't bear affordable repair. It's not possible for most things. And so there is this.
Yeah, the Nexus have a lot of, at least in my experience, some of the programs about like weights. They want tonnage of diverted landfill, and you're like, is it though? But the point is, there's not an actualization. This is a quality of life metric. You're talking about quantifiable versus qualitative data, and you can, be blue in the face, surveys blue in the face, but looking at like habit shift, habit formation. I've also been part of like circularity, right? Had a panel that was very lovely talking about, like, Dell was there and said, we have to be driven by market research and market demand. And that just blows my mind, because who is not going to buy a computer because of a repairability score when they need a computer? Again, it goes back to some time capital questions too. And yeah, there's so many ways.
So how do you measure what wasn't bought because of a repair cafe?
Absolutely. Right. Yes. And how do you measure? We've had people, they're just going to go resell it, so don't fix their things. And I'm like, well, if they can pay their bills because they can resell it, who cares?
Donate. That we get people wanting to donate, and we don't always
absolutely have yes. And I mean, those are value systems. So a lot of this framework has to go back to what your organization's, your community's values are going to be in the momentum of the lens of repair. Jessa, I see you. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, so hi everyone. I'm Jessa. I use they them pronouns here in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Station School Library. On the vein of habit shift, we recently started asking at Fix It Fair in our feedback forms, we say, before this event, how likely were you to have tried to fix something on your own? And we get that base. And then we ask them, okay, after this event, how likely are you to attempt to fix something on your own? And we get to see like a tangible change there, which is always like heartwarming to me. And then we also asked folks, did you learn anything at the Fix It Fair? Like, share with us what you learned. And then even folks whose objects maybe weren't fixed will share something they learned at the event. So I think we need to ask folks if we want to know. So I just wanted to make that one point on the value and the habit shift. I'm still working. I think attention we've felt in terms of like, trying to please everyone, trying to get folks in and out as quickly as possible. We send the survey after the event, and that means we get less folks filling it out. So I'm one question I have for the group, if anyone does that type of surveying in person during checkout. I can also say, for quick context, at our checkout, we weigh every item, and then there's an optional photo booth with like a Fix It Fair frame. So there's already like these two steps. So I'm a little bit wary of like making a checkout line when there's already a little bit of a check-in line. But we had our biggest Fix It Fair. We had almost 300 people come, and then I only had 20 something people fill out the form. So that's a question I have for the group, but just wanted to kind of offer that in terms of
we
like,
might
the value
just have
of data.
yeah, sorry, we might just have like 1 minute left, and I just wanted to add
sorry.
like, no, you're great. If anybody wants to share that, please like put it into the chat or send it to us so we can share afterwards too, especially debrief forms. But the questions that are going into this chat too, we can potentially address later. But also coming from a place of like centering on like, no one's there for malice. If you're doing the thing, then that is always the thing. Peter posted his question about his big existential question: how do we heal our society through this? And there is no magic bullet. There is no singular answer to this. But Suzie, I would just maybe toss it to you to wrap up and say,
Amanda, I know you were on the circularity, Untangling Circularity podcast, right? Wasn't that you?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great podcast. It's a lot about textiles, but it talks about other things. And she's had several people on who are doing like, apps and startups about repair. But it's like the echelon of very expensive repair, some of them, you know what I mean? And there's like, we're here doing this for free. And then Cobbler, COBLR.com is like $300 to mail in your, very fancy shoes to get them repaired. And it's like, it's great because it's getting people who might not think of repair cafes as, that's for people who can't afford, whatever, people who are in a different class, but it's not helping. It's not helping that's not doing the same thing we're doing. So in between, I think there's a really big, and I would make a pitch for reuse innovation centers, and hopefully with repair shops. That's sort of what I see as a hopeful future, is like a paid repair shop in a reuse innovation center.
Well, and I brought up actually in that interview about, it ended up being part of the conversation, and I've been chewing on it ever since then. It's just valuation recap. If manufacturers valued the raw materials that were going into their product versus the end product that was going to the consumer, you would have culpability for that producer responsibility. You would have an investment in that's more adequate, that would prevent slave wages in proportion to exploitation. But you would also have a viability for end of life. That's what we're all getting after, is it's all rental. We're all just renting everything. It's just rental of time. We're renting, these bodies, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're renting our cars, we're renting, because at the end of the day, they don't explode into other things. On a molecular level, they are still these other composites, and we have to figure out how to convert them into what we need next. And if we don't have more of a re-evaluation of the value to manufacturing, to the usefulness of it, just to get super heady and talk about thousand square feet or 1,000,000 foot view there on that, because you look at it and it seems daunting. It seems inconsequential because you're not shifting the needle on these bigger questions and valuations. And that's the struggle that we are in as well. When I look at grants, or when I look at funding opportunities, or I look at the support that several of us have, it doesn't align perfectly with these correlations, these metrics. And so adding life cycle analysis, adding in calculations, and not having that be, ethereal or totally collegiate level, making it accessible, that can be a shifting conversation. There's the equity pieces too, just to kind of come back to that, is pretty huge because there are people that are suffering from the choices and the consequence of devaluation for cheap and pollution and exploitative practices for manufacturers. So I think that that can't be discounted. If we really knew what the like human cost or the cost to the environment was on a given shelf, you know, at where Best Buy or whatever, could you imagine you know, what that would look like? There would be huge things that anyway. So well, we didn't figure it out. It's 12:05. I don't know how we haven't been kicked out yet. Um, does anyone want to share other thoughts other than Peter getting more meta? What's happening here in the chat? I've lost track.
Luke, oh, go ahead, Luke. I saw your comment, but go ahead. I'd love
Yeah,
to hear this.
I've got a quick question. So we have a program. It's a rather large reuse innovation center in Kashmir, Washington. It's brand new. We just started in April last year, and it's grown quickly. But there's two staff, and we are good managers, but we don't know how to fix tools. So we have to figure out how to bring people in that do know how to fix tools. And I'm wondering, I mean, we've talked about paid repair and we host repair cafes monthly, but I don't know. We can't like bring on an hourly staff member. I wonder if anyone's done anything with like, there's a textile repair shop in the area that has a textile repairist, sewist that just is an independent contractor, basically. Has anyone experimented with independent contractor in the repair world?
That's what we do. So I'm in Minnesota. We do mending clinics. So we're only doing textile repair and we pay, and everybody's an independent contractor. We do $25 an hour. Granted, we have a grant for it. So that allows us to like, and that was part of the thing is we wanted to acknowledge that, especially when it comes to sewing. So we, again, this is just focus on this, but when it comes to clothing mending, that's often like seen as this unpaid skill that women should often share, as in particular. So thinking about like equity and who is often asked to give their time and who and how people are valued in society. We do have one person who volunteers her time. Full disclosure, she's a longtime friend of mine, was like, no way you're going to pay me, but otherwise everyone else is paid. But it did really allow us to get a wide variety of folks mending for us. And we started off with just 3 people, but then we've kind of grown this list. We have about 8. And so then each event we have, 3 or 4 people and everybody gets paid. Now, of course, when our grant runs out, we're kind of like, what's the next step? But I think it has absolutely made a difference for who was interested in even coming to the table and putting in an application when we did it.
I'll just say that we're gonna lose it in a minute. I know that Goodwill. I talked to Goodwill of the Rochester, Buffalo. They have paid contracts for government work to do mending. But Jessa, you had a hand raised.
Oh, super quick to the education side. I was just going to say we've used Fix It Fairs to recruit volunteers, and then we also open up our internal Weird Tool Library. So our internal Fix It days are educational. We are clear you do not have to be an expert fixer. Just don't lose any of the parts. You won't make it worse. So we have that like informal education. And then we try to show folks you don't have to be an expert to be a fixer. So just wanted to bring in like regular volunteer role of being a tool fixer as a route to then be a Fix It Fair volunteer.
And Ming Ming, do you have a second?
We do have a pay with the library right now. We go to different library, mobile mending. They are paid as contractor